If you are looking to get better at looping in Dead by Daylight, you have come to the right place. This Dead by Daylight looping guide is, a little bit more geared towards beginner players or those who struggle with looping. Now let me preface this by saying I am not the greatest looper in Dead by Daylight by any means, but these tips and examples are going to help you extend the chase and buy your team more time to get generators done and hopefully win the chase. But before we go ahead and hop right into it, guys, if you guys wouldn't mind, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It would mean the absolute world to me, but let's go ahead and cover some looping. So before we cover our tips for looping, I wanted to kind of briefly explain what the purpose of looping really is. Looping is running the killer around a pallet or some sort of obstacle to waste their time so your team can heal each other or work on generators. This skill is very useful to learn, and this will help buy your team a lot of valuable time. I just kind of wanted to briefly cover what looping is and what the purpose of looping really is, but let's go over our first tip for looping. The first tip that we are going to cover whenever it comes to looping is looking at the killer's red stain. Now this is very crucial whenever it comes to looping a killer in Dead by Daylight, and this is something you should just be doing in general because the red stain from the killer is showing you which direction the killer is looking. But let's go over an example real quick of where the red stain is going to help us out quite a bit in this chase. As you can see, I'm being chased by Ghostface and I'm injured. I go to this area right here and I begin to loop him for a while. Now one thing I want to emphasize on this clip is pretty much the whole time I have a pretty good idea of where he's at and where he's going because I have eyes on his red stain. Now as this clip continues, I loop him some more, then I use Dead Hard to extend the chase, but eventually he does get me down. Now the important thing here is I wasted around 44 seconds of the killer's time allowing my team to unhook Adam and fully heal him. The other thing that I would like to tell you really quick that is going to make this tip even better is try to pan your camera ever so slightly to where you can see the killer's red stain and have a pretty good idea of where you are going. Knowing this information will help you out tremendously and will help you decide your next move. The second tip we are going to cover is hugging obstacles whenever you are looping. Whenever you are looping, it's very crucial to stay as close as possible to any object or obstacle you are looping. That way you can get to a pallet or to your next loop a little bit faster and lower the chance of you being hit. Now let's go ahead and cover an example of what I mean. As you can see here in this clip, we are being chased by the hag, so I decide to hug the debris as I am looping her, and she actually swings at me a couple of times and misses, but because we are hugging the wall, we are able to move around a little bit faster and shorten the distance to our pallet just in case we need it. I also did drop the pallet a little bit earlier than I should have, but then luckily we proceed to the next loop and I loop her some more. Then I fake a 360 and then she just completely gives up on the chase. This tip is very useful because it slightly shortens the distance you need to get to a pallet, or if you need to get to another loop, it's just kind of a nice, a little bit quicker way to get to wherever you need to go. But let's go to tip number 3. The third tip that we are going to cover whenever it comes to looping is being unpredictable. This example that we are going to use is actually going to tie in very well with our first tip. As you can see here, I'm being chased by Wesker at the killer's shack. I look at his red stain to see where he is coming from, and I begin to make my move outside the killer's shack and start the loop. I go ahead and vault out of the window, and he tries to dash forward and hit me, but he misses. I wait here for a second so I can see where he is coming from, and he's coming outside toward me. Now I want to pause the clip right here because this is very important. Now I could have went right inside the door, and honestly I probably could have got a better read on him and tried to see where he was coming from, but I decide to go around and force him to come to me rather than him knowing exactly where I am at. Not only does this make me very unpredictable, but I also have a number of options of where I could go. I just wanted to point this out because I have seen a lot of survivors constantly run in a circle whenever I play as killer, and after a little bit you kind of, figure out what the survivors are doing. So, it's very important to always stay very unpredictable and always keep the killer guessing. As the clip continues, we are still looping Wesker, and something very interesting happens. We are right near the window, and he tries to go back in the killer's shack and cut us off because he thinks we may have vaulted through the window, and luckily for us, we did not. In fact, we actually stayed near the window, and he vaulted through the window, and we go back in the killer's shack and through the window once again. Once we go through the window again, he just straight up leaves us. I know this was quite a bit to take take in, but I just wanted to show and illustrate how being unpredictable could really throw off the killer and actually extend the chase or actually make them completely leave us alone. The fourth tip that we are going to cover is knowing when to throw down the pallet. Now this is one thing that survivors really struggle with, understandably, because when the killer is that close, it's kind of hard to gauge what the killer will do, but I want to show you one of the better examples of this, and we are going to show you actually a very recent clip. Now with this example, I already know what the hag will do. She's going to respect the pallet and wait for me to drop it, so what do? I just go ahead and loop her some more and actually pull a nice move on her. Now let's say I didn't know what she was going to do. I still would have refused to drop the pallet. Now the reason why I wouldn't have dropped the pallet right away is because on this particular loop I could use both sides of the obstacles to my advantage to kind of see where she is going to go. This is always just something to keep in mind, to not always drop the pallet whenever you are looping, because you could actually waste more of the killer's time if they respect the pallet and wait for you to drop the pallet. So that way, you know, you can always just kind of keep them busy and always just kind of waste more of their time, which, I mean, you know, that is never a bad thing. But let's go to tip number 5. The fifth and final tip that I would like to cover in regards to looping is using obstacles to your advantage just by looking over obstacles or looking through windows. Now this can happen in many ways, and honestly it's one of the best ways to get information relatively quickly if you are being chased, and honestly it's quite simple to do. So let's go over one example real quick where we use this to our advantage. So in this clip we are looping Wesker, and we actually loop him for quite a while. As the clip goes on, one window is blocked. Now here is where using the environment will help you out quite a bit. As you can see here, Wesker decides to actually go the other way, and the reason we know this is because we looked right through the window and he decides to go the other way. Now if we actually would have looped around, he actually would have hit us much sooner. Now this is very important to get into the habit of doing, because once you get into higher ranks, killer will oftentimes pull off some really nice moves and they'll score a free hit on you. Let's go over one more example where using the environment can actually give you an advantage. In this clip we get into a chase and we decide to loop the pallet. We stop on the other side. As you can see, the killer's red stain stops, which means the killer is most likely going to go the other way around. We run him through the pallet again, and this part right here is something that I want to stress because this can give you a lot of info on what the killer is doing. As you can see, we cannot see the killer's red stain, so our only option is to look over the rock right at Wesker, so we can see exactly where he is going and we can make our move. Always be looking for the killers in these types of scenarios because it can give you a lot of information, especially when you are looping pallets like this. Alright guys, we have made it to the end of the video. Thank you guys so much for coming out. It means the absolute world to me. Let me know if these tips helped you out and all that jazz. But if you are brand new, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It would mean the absolute world to me. But I do hope that you have a great rest of your day, and we'll catch you on the next one, guys. Have a good one.